Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're playing Watch Rites for Net Benefits, the series where we explore the benefits of net decking in Pauper. Watch Rites is an amazingly interesting goblin token combo deck. Basically, you're trying to flood the board with goblin tokens, fill your hand up with as many cards as possible, and then use Rites of Initiation to attack your opponent for lethal. This list in particular comes from Ricardo Carrasco, who took it to a top 8 finish in Madrid's Pauper League last November. Before I get into the deck tech, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Alright, let's have a look at Watch Rites. The reason Watch Rites can cheese out so many wins is because its backup plan is just to flood the board with tokens and attack normally. I'm going to go over the spells that we use to produce tokens first. We'll start our creature-based token generation with MtG War Marshal. It costs 1 and a red for a 1/1 Goblin Warrior with Echo 1 and a red, which means at the beginning of your upkeep, if this came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay its Echo cost. When MtG War Marshal enters the battlefield or dies, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. MtG War Marshal is a staple in almost every goblin deck for good reason. This generates 2 bodies by entering the battlefield. If you block with it the turn it comes down and it dies, you create a goblin token. If you don't pay its Echo cost, you get a goblin token. If you do want to pay its Echo cost in a kind of grindy matchup, when it does eventually die, you get a goblin token. It's great. Next, as copies 4 and 5 of MtG War Marshal, we have Goblin Instigator, which costs 1 and a red for a 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. I think the split here is really interesting. You can commit Goblin Instigator to the board and keep it around as an attacker without paying its upkeep costs, so it's a little added pressure early on in the game. Next, we have all of our impactful token generation that comes in the form of sorcery spells. We start this package off with Hordling Outburst. Watch Rites players were guaranteed some of the most excited players to see Hordling Outburst get downshifted. It's super powerful for this strategy because it makes so many tokens. It costs 1 red for sorcery and creates 3 1/1 red goblin tokens. Next, we have Krenko's Command and Dragon Fodder. They're functionally the same. They cost 1 and a red for a sorcery and create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. It's pretty straightforward. We're trying to get 2 bodies on turn 2 every single time. While these spells are a little weaker than our creature-based token generation, they still get the job done. Finally, we have Kuldotha Rebirth, which I'm not used to seeing in these Watch Rites lists. Maybe this is what pushed Ricardo over the top. Kuldotha Rebirth costs 1 red mana for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast Kuldotha Rebirth, you sacrifice an artifact. That's okay, we're running artifact lands for exactly that purpose. It creates 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Everybody knows that running a ton of 1/1s in Pauper is some sketchy business, so our payoff cards have to be incredibly powerful. Our first payoff card is Keep Watch. Keep Watch costs 2 and a blue for an instant and draws a card for each attacking creature. It's awesome that this spell is instant because if we just plunge in with all of our creatures, we can cast Keep Watch before any of them die due to our opponent's blocking. We're going to have tons of bodies on the battlefield, so we're going to draw a ton of cards. Our other payoff is exactly how we're going to try to win the game. It's Rites of Initiation. It costs 1 red mana for an instant and allows you to discard any number of cards at random. Creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. If you draw Rites of Initiation when you're behind on board or just in kind of a normal deck that's not building around it, you can see how it could be sort of an anemic card. However, if we fire off a Watch Rites while we're attacking with even 3 or 4 goblins and then Rites of Initiation all of the cards we draw, we pretty much win the game on the spot. Next up, I'm going to talk about some of the creatures that make up our backup plan. That backup plan is just to be a straight up red deck wins goblin style deck. The first one of those backup plan creatures is Foundry Street Denizen. Foundry Street Denizen costs 1 red mana for a Goblin Warrior 1/1, and whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under your control, Foundry Street Denizen gets +1/+0 until end of turn. We have so many token generating spells that we're often going to pump Foundry Street Denizen into a 3/1 every single turn. It's going to be awesome to continue pressuring our opponent with our 1-drop. Next up is Goblin Bushwhacker, and I'm super thankful to have this as kind of a release valve for those controlling decks. Goblin Bushwhacker costs 1 red mana for a 1/1 with kicker 1 red mana. You may pay an additional red mana as you cast Goblin Bushwhacker. If you do, when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. The reason Goblin Bushwhacker is a better finisher against control decks is because we don't have to discard our hand to create a lethal board with it. If it gets countered, no big deal. We'll just plunge at our opponent again next turn. Finally, our last creature is Burning Tree Emissary. It costs 2 hybrid Gruul mana, which means you can pay green or red for them, and when it enters the battlefield, it makes red and green mana. We'd love to win every game with our flashy Rites of Initiation combo, but opening up a hand with a couple of Burning Tree Emissaries and just enough mana to cast them is a way to explode out onto the board and kill just about anybody without risking discarding your hand. Next up, we have some non-creature spells to help make our deck a little bit more consistent and also to control the board. The first one of those non-creature spells is Manamorphose. It costs 1 and a hybrid Gruul mana for an instant that adds 2 mana in any combination of colors and allows you to draw a card. When we're at a critical point in the game and just trying to draw our Keep Watch or our Rites of Initiation or just enough tokens to go wide enough to get those spells off, Manamorphose is a great spell to help us continue digging while keeping our mana constant. Finally, our last non-land card is Lightning Bolt. Don't have to say much about this one, just one of the best interactive spells in the format. It costs 1 red mana for an instant and deals 3 damage to any target. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. We'll start with the artifact lands that I talked about before. We have Great Furnace and Seed of the Synod. They're just like mountains and islands respectively, but they're artifacts. Next, we have 4 copies of Swiftwater Cliffs. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, you gain a life, and when they're untapped, you can tap them for blue or red. It's okay to have a few tap lands in this deck because our powerful stuff starts happening on turn 2. Finally, we just have 6 basic mountains. We do want a number of untapped lands along with our artifact lands so that we can commit all of our 2-drops on time. Also, it's just really good to have consistent red mana on turn 1. We do cast a lot of red spells. Alright, let's have a look at this sideboard, and of course it's a very powerful one because this is an Izzet deck. First, we have a Null to counter all of our opponent's artifacts or enchantments. We have 3 copies of Dispel against those decks that are more efficient and can race us. We have 2 copies of Electricity for wrathing our opponent's X1s. We have 2 copies of Hydroblast for fighting our combo through counters. We have a copy of Flaring Pain if our opponent is on a lot of fogs. We have 1 copy of Hydroblast against those red deck mirrors. We have 3 copies of Goblin Caves for bringing in against Electricity decks, and we have a single copy of Smash to Smithereens for blowing up our opponent's artifacts. And there you have it, Watch Rites by Ricardo Carrasco. Congratulations on your top 8 in Madrid, Ricardo. We're going to take this deck into a league at twitch.tv this Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. We're there every Wednesday night playing competitive Pauper decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday night.